All right, welcome in. This is Mark Gottfried, and this is the Front Row Podcast. I'm having a blast doing my podcast, Jay, and I'm really excited today because I've got Jay Bilas, and most people would know Jay. They would know you as a commentator on television, but they really wouldn't know, unless they're old like me, how good a basketball player you were. So, great player, attorney. Actually coached a few years at Duke and then kind of ventured into broadcasting. And Jay, you've just done a spectacular job. So I'm excited to have you on. How you doing?
I'm doing great, my friend. I couldn't be better. Hope you're well too.
I'm doing great. So let's jump in. So let's go all the way back to high school, because and what I like to do, Jay, is kind of, high achievers like yourself, people that have done really well. That I think I always look at my children and your son, and you say, how can maybe there's a word of wisdom or something along the way that really kind of inspires somebody to do well. And so here you are. You're in back in the class of 1982, and Palos Verdes. Was it Palos Verdes High School? Did you attend at Rolling Hills?
It was Rolling Hills High School back then, and now it's called Peninsula High School. Palos Verdes closed down for a while, so they merged the two schools, and they changed it. They didn't want to upset any of the PV guys. So they changed the name of the school to Peninsula High School from Rolling Hills. And then, years later, Palos Verdes opened back up again. And so now, all of our legacy is gone. There's no more Rolling Hills Titans. It's now Peninsula Panthers. But I think that still makes me the all-time leading scorer of Rolling Hills High School. Luckily, there's nobody can break it now since they closed it down or got rid of the name.
So just a little full disclosure. I was in class. We were both in the class of 1982. I took an official visit to Duke, as did you that year. David Henderson, Mark Allery, Johnny Dawkins, Jay Bilas. I was on the B list, though. I was on the second tier list. You guys were on the A list, but
you were not. You just said no. But I visited Oral Roberts, where you wound up going.
There we go.
We both visited Oral Roberts too when Ken Hayes was coaching there.
How about that? Small world. So here's an interesting, which I think would be interesting. So you're in California in high school. People don't really realize, but at that time, Coach K was really kind of an unknown. That first or second year there, he really struggled. I can remember going on a recruiting visit, and I think that year they might have been something like 11-22. I can't remember, but it wasn't very good.
11-17.
11-17. And I'm sure you're getting recruited by a lot of schools in the West and probably all around the country, but what kind of, how'd that process work for you, and how'd you end up choosing Duke at that time? Because again, it's not Duke as it is now, where you've got the, all the success that Coach K had. So for you, what went through your mind then?
Mark, it was a really kind of odd thing. I played in high school at Rolling Hills. I played with all the guys I grew up with. We were all teammates from fourth grade all the way through high school. But as much as I loved the guys I played with, I didn't have a really good experience with my high school coach. And I certainly wasn't the only one. But, I was fortunate enough, as you were, to have an opportunity to play beyond high school. And so my decision was less about a school, which it probably should have been about, and it was more about the coach I played for, because I was not going to go through again what I went through in high school with the coach-player relationship. So, I kind of figured that my college choice was the only time in my basketball life that I was going to get to choose who I played for. Every other time it was dictated to you. You go to your local high school, the coach is already there. If you're fortunate enough to play professionally, coach is already there. I got to choose in college, and I was going to do that right. And so I came down to 4 different guys I wanted to play for. And the schools really didn't match up or make a lot of geographic sense, or they weren't similar really. But I came down to Coach K at Duke, Jim Boeheim at Syracuse, Lute Olson was at Iowa at that time in the early 80s, as you remember. And then Kansas, where there's a guy named Ted Owens, who I revered and still love. He's 90 some years old now, and still try to see him every time I'm there. He lives in Oklahoma. But the truth is, Mark, I just like Coach K the best. And now if my mom were deciding, I would have gone to Iowa, because she was in love with Lute Olson.
Right.
I mean, he walked into the house and she thought Paul Newman came in to recruit me. She melted. And I love Coach O myself, but Coach K was the guy I connected with. And at the end of the process, I felt like I want to play for him. Mm-hmm. And I wasn't thinking about, well, he played for Bob Knight. Is he going to be hard on me? Or, they're not winning. Is anything going to, I was arrogant enough to think, well, if I go there, they're going to win. But that was the reason. It was nothing more than that.
So what was the pitch? Because for you to connect with him, he wasn't winning, the championships and the ACC tournaments and the Final Fours then. So, like, what was his pitch, or with the connection that you two kind of had, or what was it about him that you said, that's the guy, that's my guy right there? What was it?
I don't know that I can necessarily put my finger on it, but it was just sort of what I felt after spending so much time with him. And, he would fly out to watch me play. He flew out one time to watch me play I was just playing in a pickup game, an after school pickup game. And he came out and watched. He couldn't talk to me, but he was just there. And, he worked really hard and he was really honest. And there were a couple things, like one, my senior year of high school, the school would let us go off campus for lunch. Couldn't do that before then. And so I used to go to a local Mexican place every once in a while. And some of the coaches that would recruit me, they'd come and try to take me to lunch, and I would always want to go there. And so I went there with Coach K. And when the check came, I mean, if it were, this is a long time ago, if it was $10, I would have been surprised. Mm-hmm. And he made me pay for my share. And he was the only guy that did that.
Wow.
Everybody else paid, and he made me pay for it. And I was thinking, I was a straight up guy. And the other thing was, at that time, I'm 6'7", and everybody that recruited against Duke, that was recruiting me, kind of negatively recruited against Duke, saying, if you go to Duke, they're going to make you play center for 4 years there. And that's not that you're not a center.
Right.
And so I said, oh no, he would never do that. And I actually asked him about it. I said, everybody's saying you're going to make me play center if I go to Duke. Is that true? And he said, well, for a year, yeah. He said, I don't have anybody better to do it than you. So I'd ask you to do it for a year, but I'll promise you this, I'll recruit a big guy to come in. And he did, but nobody moved me out of there. So I did wind up playing center for 4 years, but he answered it honestly.
Yeah.
And like, how could I hold that against him? I never questioned it, and everything he ever said was true. Like, I might not have liked it, but everything he said was the truth.
If you go back, Jay, and that was my era, so I was watching closely, even though I ended up playing at Alabama, and we actually played, I think, in the Meadowlands one of those years. We played you guys. You guys beat us, I think, by about 8 or 10 points. Maybe that was 86. You may have been gone. 86, 87.
It was 87, yeah. Because you had to sit out
That's
a year
right.
after transferring from Oral Roberts. So we were class 86, but you were 87.
Exactly. And but I always, and I'm sure you know this, and you're so humble with all you've done, but your group of you and Mark Allery and David and Johnny Dawkins really changed the game, for Coach K. And he had enough foresight to see and say, okay, I'm going to bring these guys in. I'm going to play them. You guys all played. You all played when you were young. And really, would you agree? I mean, I know you should. You changed the whole game.
Yeah, you're kind to say that. I mean, people say that, and it's very nice that folks remember that. We didn't go, I didn't think it would be as hard as it was. We were 11-17 our freshman year. Mm-hmm. Our freshman year, NC State won the national championship. Virginia was number one. North Carolina spent time at number one. Michael Jordan was at Carolina, and Ralph Sampson was at Virginia. I mean, the league was a bunch of older, like senior, junior lottery picks. And so it was really difficult, but we learned a lot and we got better together. And then by the time we got to be sophomores, we were nationally ranked and in the tournament and a seeded team and all that. So things got better quickly, but it didn't seem that way our freshman year. But, the thing that really made a difference, in my opinion, is Tommy Amaker. Mm-hmm. Because Tommy Amaker came in the next year. Right. I mean, he played against you in the Meadowlands.
Oh, yeah.
He came in and took over the point. And then all of a sudden we had this unbelievable leader that kind of glued everything together, and everybody could kind of do their jobs without worrying about what was going on with the ball, because he had it all taken care of. Best defensive player, best leader. I mean, I've said this and I joke about it a little bit, but it's true. I met Tommy when I was 18 years old. I'm a foot taller than him and I'm older than him, and I've looked up to him since the day I met him. He was a huge difference maker for us.
I go back to, Jay, and then I think you're 1,000% correct on that. when I was getting recruited, it was Chuck Swenson was the assistant coach. And I remember a call I got one day. I took a visit during the season. I had broken my foot, so I wasn't playing for a few weeks. Anyway, and I really liked Duke and the academics that were there and, the whole thing. And I was kind of playing it cool. But I remember I got this phone call, and Coach Swenson said, we've taken this other guard. And so I'm not sure we're going to continue to recruit you, but we want to be honest and let you know we've got this other guard. Well, I didn't realize at the time the other guy was Johnny Dawkins. He's pretty good, probably a little better than me. But, at the time I'm like, wait a minute, come on, But that whole group of you guys, always followed you because of, visiting Duke. And what you guys did was just spectacular. And so when you went to Duke, Jay, did you have an idea you wanted to go to law school after, or was that something that came about for you after you were there?
That came about after. I had an idea I wanted to get into broadcasting, but it was only because when I was in high school, you remember, like your local paper or the LA Times or something, in my case, might do an article on you as a emerging, good high school player. And they would always ask you back then, I'm sure they still do, what do you want to do after basketball? And the truth is, Mark, I didn't have a good answer. Right. I didn't really know what I wanted to do. And you'll remember at that time, there were some former athletes getting into broadcasting, like Frank Gifford and Don Drysdale was doing baseball and all that. And so I said, well, maybe broadcasting. And as a result of that, coaches would, when they're trying to recruit you, they'd say, hey, we got a great communications department or this or that. And one thing led to another. I started working in that area during the summertime. And so I developed an interest in it without necessarily having one before I said that. It just sort of developed that way. But law school came from my dad. My father's 90 years old now. But when I was a kid, he didn't have the opportunity to go to college. Neither did my mom. They had to work when they were teenagers. And so my dad thought, going to college was important, but you really should go to law school too. And so when I was getting out of college, he started hitting me with that. Like, you should think about law school. And, I wasn't good. I got drafted in the NBA, but I wasn't good enough to stick. So I played in Europe. And he was like, take the law school admission test and apply. Because if you get hurt or if you quit or get cut or whatever, if you play 10, 12 years in Italy, you're not going to go to law school when you're 34. Like you need to get admitted somewhere. So you kind of grease the skids for that. And so I did it. I did it my third year playing overseas. I took the LSAT and I got admitted to law school. And that's how I got the coaching job. Coach K heard that I had applied to law school. And I think actually he was very influential in my getting into Duke law. I think my grades were pretty good, but they probably weren't Duke law worthy. And so he called me and said, hey, if you get admitted, are you going to go? And I said, well, I'd like to keep playing. And he said, well, here's what I'd like you to do. He said, I'd like you to come on my staff as an assistant. And then as you get admitted to law school, accept it. And you can do both at the same time. Wow. And I thought, both, I don't know. I can do one one well. But it was his sort of vision that I could and should do that. And he fought for me to do that because the law school didn't want that. They didn't think I should try to coach and go to law school at the same time, but he fought for it. And I did it. And after a difficult first year, it was challenging. But after that, I didn't feel like it was that big of a deal. So I did both at the same time. And the coaching part was easy because we had Leitner and Grant Hill and Bobby Hurley and Thomas Hill. We didn't lose very much. And, I just stood there working with the big guys with Pete Gaudette. And anything you told the guys to do, they could already do. So I didn't have to worry about anything.
So when you were young, Jay, who were the people that really kind of influenced you where you understood, hard work, the dedication, all the things you had to do to become the player you were, the person you were? Like, if you go back, we all have a couple people you say, man, if it wasn't for this couple, two or three folks, and I just don't know that I would have become who I became. Who would that be for you?
Before I got to college, it would be two people that stood out, maybe three. My dad, number one. My dad was a really hard worker, pretty quiet guy, and wasn't the type to give advice. but when he said something, he meant it and it resonated. And so he was always, really helpful to me in that regard. I had a coach that coached me from 4th grade to 8th grade, and I played on something called a conference team in Rolling Hills. It was a travel team. So we traveled all around Southern California, Nevada sometimes, and played in tournaments every weekend during basketball season. And we probably played 50, 60 games a year. It was like an AAU winter. A number of really good players in Southern California did that. And I was lucky enough to be one of them. And the coach's name was Dick Spidell. And he was the one that kind of got me to expect more out of myself. And I didn't know that I was any good at basketball. I mean, I thought I was pretty good, but I didn't really know. And the one thing is kind of transformative for me. After my 8th grade year with that team, we had one of our last practices before the end of the season. And it turned out it was at my high school, the high school I was going to, Rolling Hills. And Rolling Hills, 2,500 students, big school. My brother had gone there. And, it seemed like when you're in 7th or 8th grade, like high school basketball players are like gods to you. And I didn't, I didn't think I could hang with those guys. And so he had said, hey, next year, you're going to be here every day. And I had said to him, I said, do you think I can play here? At Rolling Hill, like I can make the team. And he goes, he looked at me, he goes, make the team. And he goes, you're going to be the best player this school's ever had.
Wow.
And nobody had ever said anything like that to me before. And as a result of that, I started to think more of myself, hopefully not arrogantly, but I started to expect more.
Wow.
And then I thought, well, if you think I can do it, I can do it. When I was not sure. And, things obviously got better for me after that and had a nice high school career and all that. But that was meaningful. Like to have somebody tell you they think you got to change, like you could be really good. You always hear people talk about, proving people wrong. Well, I mean, I wanted to prove him right. And that was, I had more of a positive outlook. Like, well, I reacted to people saying, hey man, even when they got on me, if they were criticizing me to say, hey, you're really good and you can do this, that was uplifting for me. And the other would be a teacher I had named Billy Kramer, who was a speech and debate teacher. And my mom made me take speech and debate courses when I was younger because she wanted me to be able to handle myself in public. And I went to competitions, and nothing I've ever done since then has been as hard as that.
Wow.
Arguing a case in court, doing stuff on TV, nothing compares to how hard that was. And if I could do that, everything else seemed like a layup.
I was glad you to hear you mention your dad, because obviously my father's been a great influence on me, and my dad, and my dad would, for years, he's getting a little bit older now, but I know he'd fire off text to you one way or another if he didn't like what you said on television. But he was a basketball coach and then an athletic director, but he was always somebody that I just revered too. Like when he spoke when I was little, and it just made such an impact. So that's encouraging to hear you talk about your father in that way and the impact that he had.
Well, my dad, yeah, I think our dads were a lot the same. Your dad had more of a public job. My dad was a TV repairman, and really both our parents were really hard workers. But my dad, I don't want to make him sound the wrong way here, but he wasn't a guy that threw compliments around easy. So when he told you did something well, it was meaningful. And, when he was disappointed, if he ever shook his head at me, I was like, man, I really screwed up. He never really yelled at me or anything, but boy, if he ever went, geez, I was like, oh my God, I screwed up here. Wow. If he's disappointed. But he never coached me, never did one thing. He was really supportive. He showed up. He didn't go to my games as a little kid because he was working, but in high school, he wound up, he pretty much came to every one of my high school games and never said a word, never said, hey, you didn't do a good job here. Why didn't you get that rebound? Or what, the only thing he ever said, if I ever complained about something, he'd say, are you kidding? I'd say, well, geez, I never got the ball. He'd say, go get it.
Go get it.
Like he goes, you never get the ball. He says, look, I watch all these games. Your teammates miss a lot of shots. Go get it.
How about that?
And I was like, he said, look, if you want to average 20 points a game, how hard is that? It's 5 points a quarter.
Right.
You can get that grabbing 2 offensive rebounds and getting fouled once. And you don't need somebody to throw you the ball. And so he would only respond to something stupid that I would say. But he was always like the fact that he never like jumped into what I was doing and told me what to do. Like he got to tell me what to do at home. Mm-hmm. Basketball was something that he was there to support it and watch and enjoy it. But he didn't venture into, hey man, why aren't you doing this? Or you should be doing this. He was there he guided me a little bit when I needed it, but that was it. And I really appreciated that.
Did you find yourself, Jay, as you then became a parent, we all do, we look back, and parenting is hard. Number one, I tell people all the time, it's hard, and there's not a right answer all the time as a parent. Sometimes we're just trying to do the best we can. That's all we're trying to do, and with what we know at that time. And but as you became a parent, did you feel like some of those things that your parents, your dad especially, your mom, that you could see then those kind of things starting to come out with the way you parented?
Definitely, especially staying out of, try as best you can, trying to stay out of your kids' leisure activities. And I considered basketball, even though it was really important to me, that was one of my leisure activities. I played because it was fun. I wanted to play. I loved it. But my dad was like, it's your career. And he never had any, this is kind of my dad. Like he never had a word to say about one of my high school girlfriends. And my mom did, but my dad never did. And his thing, I remember him saying once, he goes, why should I care? I don't have to go out with her. You do. And he goes, if you like her, then, that's the end of the discussion. And I appreciated that. So with my son, I was, he's a good high school basketball player, played baseball. And I went to the games and just watched.
Right.
And it's his career, not mine. Right. And I could sort of sit there and say, well, I know a lot about basketball, but I never did anything. The only thing I did was, and I'm sure, you can relate to this better, better than anybody. If there was something that I kind of wanted to get across to my boy when he was playing, a lot of times I'd be at home watching a game or watching film of a game. And if he'd walk by, every once in a while I'd stop and say, hey, his name's Anthony. I'd say, Anthony, look at this. Look what this player's doing here. Can you believe this? Right. And I'd show him something that maybe he was doing, and I'd show him this. Can you believe this player's doing this? Like, that's absolutely the wrong decision. Well, that I might try to do it that way. So I wasn't coaching him as much. But I just consider that a small intrusion. But I wanted to be his dad, not his coach or his manager or anything like that. Like his coaches can handle it.
Right. It's interesting because I tell people all the time that the hardest thing to do sometimes is to evaluate your own child when you're watching them play. I had 4 boys and a daughter who all played sports, and a couple of them played in college. And sometimes people would ask me, say, well, how good is your son? I'd say, I have to back off of that one because I don't know. Because when I watch the game, I'm a parent. And, I dealt with a lot of parents that really didn't understand it either. But that's a great words of wisdom. So, Jay, let's talk about this real quick. So back in, you got to help me remember the year now because I'm going to forget this. But you and I, along with, it was Tom Izzo and Dave Odom and Bobby Cremens and a bunch of guys, and we had a blast. But we had the great opportunity to go and travel to Iraq and visit soldiers and meet people and meet these young, amazing volunteers who are volunteering for our armed services, and we're there. And it was just, for me, I look back, and I had a lot of great experiences coaching. I had, we've won a lot and blah, 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 all those things. But I look back at those couple trips I had, and we were trying to help the soldiers and, in a goodwill mission and, to really, boost them and be positive. But, boy, it had an impact. I know it had an impact on me. To this day, I still have kind of a reverence. I see guys and gals in our military, and it's hard for me to criticize any of them. I just look at them and I appreciate them, and that trip was pretty special that you and I were able to take way back when. Do you remember the year?
I'll never forget it.
Yeah,
I do. It was 05 and I went 05 and 06.
Right.
I went two different summers, and It was called Operation Hardwood, and the first year when we were there were 8 of us, and Dave Odom, Mike Jarvis, you mentioned Tom Izzo, and all that. We just had an unbelievable group of guys, Kelvin Sampson, and when we got there, I'll never forget, some of the things we saw, these signs on the military base: adapt and overcome. And when the soldiers would take us and show us we were shown around the base. It was Camp Arifjohn in Kuwait, where we were. And I remember this very distinctly. There are 2 things I remember. One was just you and me, and I think you'll remember this. But the first one that made the biggest impact was when one of the soldiers was taking us around in a Sprinter van, and one of the coaches had asked, "What do those flags mean?" I mean, so there's an American flag and some of the military flags, but then there were these flags that were just one color. And one of the coaches asked, "What do those mean?" And the soldier that was taking us around said, "Those are our heat orders." Because you remember it's 120 degrees over there.
My goodness, was it
hot?
And
it was so hot, but it wasn't humid. And so they were all wearing long sleeves, told us to do the same, hydrate, stay out of the sun, because you're basically baking there. You're sweating, but you don't really know it. And they said, "Those are our heat orders." And so the soldier was explaining the different flags, and that day it wasn't crazy hot, but he says, it was only like 115. But he said, if there's, this color flag, we can be 30 minutes on, 30 minutes off. So we can work outside for 30 minutes, then we got to get inside for 30. And if it's a black flag, that's the severe heat order. So it's 10 minutes on, 50 minutes off.
That's right.
And so one of the coaches says, "Well, how do you get your work done when that's going on?" And he said, I say this respectfully. He goes, "We don't heed that order."
Right.
And said, "We got brothers and sisters that are dying up in Iraq. We're not taking 50 minutes off. Our job," and he used the term, he goes, "Our job is to make mission." Yep. And you started thinking about the commitment and the work and, the sacrifice that goes into that we in sports talk about that kind of stuff all the time, but it's not the same. And then the other thing, you'll remember this. So at Camp Arifjohn, which was like the Ritz-Carlton of camps over there and bases, and it was really Spartan. They had a pool there. And so you and I I can't remember whether we were walking to the gym or walking to the mess or whatever, but we walked past these 2 young women who honestly looked like they should be coming to our house to knock on the door and say, "Hey, we're your babysitters." Right. They were in their early 20s. Yep. And one of them had an Alabama T-shirt on, if I remember right. And so we stop and talk to them. They both got towels over their shoulders. They just come back from the pool. And we start talking and said, "What do you guys do here?" And they said, "Well, we operate a het truck." That's right. Heavy equipment transport. And they take, heavy equipment in and out of combat zones. And one of them was a gunner, operated a big machine gun, and the other was the driver. Right. And they told us about this time they were going to retrieve some equipment like tanks or whatever that had been incapacitated. They can't just leave them there. And there had been a bullet that went through their engine block. And they said, it was a 1 in a million lucky shot. And we were stuck there. And all we had was this gun and 2 young women, soldiers. And you asked, like, that gun, I can't remember what caliber they said it was, but he said, how big of a hole does that make? And she looked at you and matter-of-factly said, "You mean like through concrete or through a person?" And you said, "Well, both." And she said, "Well, through concrete, about like this." And you go, "How about a person?" And she goes, "There wouldn't be anything left." Yep. And you're like, man, these are badass women here. No question. And I felt very comfortable that our nation's defense was in their hands.
I remember, too, that conversation. I think you might have asked the girl, you said, I can't remember correctly, but it was almost like, "So have you ever been shot at?" And that's kind of maybe led up to it. And she said, "Absolutely." Yeah. And then I think you said, "Well, have you shot back?" And she looked at you like, "Absolutely, yeah." Like, what do you think?
Damn right I have.
No doubt. We're shooting back. I also remember on that trip of going into the gym, I think it was that year, Arifjohn, it might have been the second year. But I just remember they gave us the full Army fatigues. We had the whole camouflage, and we walked into the gym there. They had a basketball gym, and we walked in. And I remember this young girl sang the national anthem. We had all had groups of soldiers on our teams, and they split them up into groups, and we played a little tournament. We had a good time, and we connected with the soldiers. But I remember vividly standing there, and the girls sang with no music, nobody playing an instrument, just sang the national anthem. And I just remember I couldn't stop, tears coming out of my eyes. It was impactful. Like, you're on the other side of the world, and we're with our soldiers. It was just phenomenal. It was a phenomenal moment, and it just kind of made everything real to me. Like, wow, this is the real deal. That this is not for play. That this is the real deal. And it was impactful.
I felt the same way. Incredibly impactful. I teared up and cried during the anthem as well. And I remember the discussion we all had, when they gave us those uniforms to wear, the fatigues, we didn't want to, at first, we didn't want to wear them. We didn't feel worthy.
Right.
And we weren't sure that, like, how's this going to be received? And I think one of the generals that was with us then said, no, the soldiers here would be honored by that. They understand. And, I remember, like, Izzo, you, all of us felt the same way. Like, are we worthy to do this? Is this right? Like, we feel like imposters doing it.
Right.
But that was one of the most meaningful. I actually have a picture of you and me there with all the guys in front of a tank and the flag they gave us that flew over the base when we left, and all the coins that we get from the different officers. It's right here on my wall in my office. I mean, I look at it every day.
It's amazing. It was an amazing. There was an amazing period. So Jay, let me ask you this now, and I want to talk to you about this. And as you've done such a great job on TV. I've told people many times that, as far as not a voice to call the games, that's different, but a voice for college basketball. I think you have done probably as much as anybody in establishing yourself as a respected voice on issues. And there's a lot of them. And you've just done a great job with that. And I think that, not everybody's going to agree with what you say. That's never going to happen. But you're not afraid to say your opinion and usually your opinions are very, very well thought out. I'm not shooting from the hip and just firing one out there. You have really kind of thought through the topics and whatever they might be. And you've also been a pretty strong critic of the NCAA. And there was a period there with Mark Emmert, and you've kind of gone through that as well. So kind of just talk to me a little bit about, your feelings towards the NCAA. Obviously, there's great things with the NCAA. I was a part of it for 35 years as a coach, and I played college basketball. So, I've always loved college basketball. But some of your thoughts on that with kind of how they've handled things, and you've got now the NIL coming into play, the transfer portal. You've got all kind of things. It's a rapidly changing landscape. But give me some of your thoughts on just generally with the NCAA.
Well, Mark, I'll take you back to the beginning because I'm a supporter of the NCAA in most everything except for some of the policies that I think are just flat out wrong, and there are several of them. But when you and I were in college, I think it was our NCAA sort of academic liaison or whatever, guy named Bill Bradford approached me and said, you've been nominated to be on an NCAA committee and replace Walter Lewis, quarterback from Alabama, who's cycling off the committee when he graduated. And would you do it? And I said, well, should I? And he said, I think you should. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So I was an athlete representative on the NCAA's long range planning committee from 1984 to 1986. And that got me behind the curtain and allowed me to see how policy was made. And learn about NCAA policy. And so when I was on that committee, I voiced some concerns that I had when I was asked. One of them was the transfer issue, that I didn't feel like I should have to sit out a year if I transferred, because what if I'd gone to Iowa and Lute Olson left after what would have been my freshman year? Would I have to stay at Iowa for somebody that didn't recruit me, or go to Arizona with Coach Olson and then I'd have to sit out and give up a year of my life for what? I'm just going to another school. It's not that big of a deal. I didn't have to sit out when I went from high school to college to acclimate myself to a new place. And I got shot down immediately. Like, no, you have to understand this is like a marriage. There's commitment and all that. And I'm like, okay. And I didn't think that the amateurism rules should be so strict. I felt that we should be able to make money while we were at school. If we worked at camp or did something, I didn't anticipate NIL at that time, got shot down. And but the people on the committee, they were all athletic directors and commissioners, some of the legendary names in NCAA history. They were really good to me. They mentored me, even though, my ideas weren't, they never carried them forward. They were always incredibly respectful, and I learned a lot from them. But at that time, I was part of the process. So even though I differed with policy, I didn't do so publicly. The committee made a decision. The NCAA made a decision. I was part of it. I need to support the decision publicly. So I never voiced any of my opposition. But when I got into broadcasting, there were times when I had to comment on that stuff, and I didn't feel like I should sit on the fence. I should just say what I thought because I had researched it. I understood it. At least I thought I did. And I like you said, I thought I'd really thought about it. And so I didn't hold back. And it became such a fertile area for discussion. As the NCAA started making more money, there started being more court cases, salaries shot through the roof, everybody's flying private, facilities. None of it made any sense anymore. Conferences getting bigger. When you and I were playing, like the ACC was 8 teams when I played in it, 16 now. And, we had 7 road trips, 5 of them by bus. So it's not the same thing now than it was then. And I've always felt like the players, if they're old enough to sell for billions of dollars, they're old enough to participate in the business. And if individual schools if they don't want to pay their players, that's fine. Let's see how that works out for you in the marketplace. But the players deserve, just like any other student on scholarship or not, they deserve to participate in the business to the level of their value. And I didn't think that was controversial. And I knew from my legal background that this was what the NCAA was doing violated federal antitrust law. And I thought the courts would catch up at some point. Well, guess what? They finally caught up. It took them a while, but they caught up. And now the NCAA is in a mess because they did not plan for the inevitability of the business catching up to their rhetoric. And their rhetoric doesn't make any sense relative to the business that they're running.
Right. Tell me if you would agree with this, because this is the way I've kind of always looked at this, Jay. And I've coached for many years and played. And when the NCAA signs a television contract, the first one, I don't know if it was maybe a decade ago or maybe I'm not exactly sure how long ago, but when you sign a contract for a 6 or 7 year period for $1 billion, and that number's out there, it's out there for the whole world to see. You've just signed a deal and for a 3-week basketball tournament. That's where most people don't realize as well. That's only the tournament. That's only the 3 weeks in March. That's not the entire season. So we've signed a deal, the NCAA, for $1 billion. And, obviously I was fortunate enough with Jim Herrick to coach Ed O'Bannon, and the whole thing began. And, Ed's playing EA Sports, and, he's not making a penny, but his likeness is in the game, and he's sitting there with his buddies and, begins a lawsuit that goes all the way to the Supreme Court and challenges it, and they win. And so now the NCAA, I thought, now their back's against the wall a bit because now they're forced. But what bothered me more than anything, Jay, was the genesis of all that is the NCAA was not sharing the money with the student athlete. And the reality is they're still not. They're still not sharing the money with the athlete. The athlete can go find their own if they're, the Bryce Youngs of the world. We get that at Alabama. He's wins the Heisman and he's in a Dr. Pepper commercial. We all get that. But now I think the onus for college athletics, and each university has now created, a collective that's quote unquote not really a part of the university. They're kind of, but they're over here, and it's filtered into the recruiting. It can't not. It's gonna be a part of it. But what has bothered me more than anything, they still not sharing the money. Would you agree that still is a bother
exactly
to me?
Right.
They still kept it all theirs for themselves, and you and I both have been at the NCAA headquarters in Indianapolis, and you walk through there, it's Taj Mahal. I mean, it's one of the nicest, most gorgeous buildings there ever is. The president's flying around a private jet, and then you got, a lot of student athletes over here eating McDonald's. And I've always felt that was, in my opinion, probably the biggest travesty of all of this. I think it's what people are missing sometimes when they talk about it on a national level.
Yeah, and it's been that way for so long. So a couple things. One, people say right now, this is the biggest period of change we've ever had in college sports history. And while it's among the biggest, it's not the biggest. The biggest occurred when you and I were in college in 1984. So a lot of people don't know this nor remember it, even for us, because we were part of the machine and we were trying to play and not thinking about this. But when before we got to college and our first couple years, the NCAA used to tell schools how often they could be on television. Walter Byers ran the NCAA. He was the executive director at the time, which, now is called president. But he used to tell, Alabama how often they could be on television in football. Okay, Alabama, you can be on national television twice this year. Notre Dame twice, Michigan once. And the schools got tired of it. They're like, wait a minute, we can build our programs through the exposure we get from television. It's a fertile area. I don't think anybody thought that there would be this much money in it, but the schools sued the NCAA under an antitrust theory. The same thing the players have sued on recently and won. And they won in 1984. It's called the Board of Regents case. And that's where the explosion of money came from. Now the conferences could go out and market their product. So your point about the NCAA tournament is exactly right. So the NCAA tournament goes for about over $1 billion a year for that 3-week tournament. And the NCAA takes that money and runs it through their office, and then they dole it out to member institutions, and they use it for their operating expenses. The conferences keep their money. So every SEC game, the SEC sells their media rights to ESPN or CBS, whomever it is. The Big Ten sells theirs to Fox and CBS, and the ACC sells to ESPN, all that stuff. They're making billions of dollars on their own media deals. And so, that's a ton of money that's running through the system. And the players, if you and I, when we were in college, if we took a free meal somewhere and somebody found out about it, we're ineligible. And none of that made any sense. And so at least now with NIL, but what NIL is showing you, Mark, in my view, is that the schools do want to pay these players. They want access to talent. They know, hey, we want the best coaches, but we have to have the best players too. And so they've set up these collectives, and they're essentially paying the players to play. Some of these collectives, they're signing a player to a contract, and say they sign a player to a $500,000 contract. They'll tell the player, okay, you have to make 10 appearances. You got to work in a soup kitchen and go speak at this event and work in Habitat for Humanity. That's how they're getting their money. It's not they're doing commercials for maybe some are for Dr. Pepper and all that, but the rank and file are getting it through their school collective. And it's just a dumb way to do it, because the NCAA does not want to cross that Rubicon and make them into employees.
Right.
That's where we're going to wind up. That's where it's headed. And there's a current case called House versus the NCAA, where the players just got class action certification. And this is going to be for real money. They're suing for revenue that they've been closed out of all these years, and they're going to win. After the Alston case, they're going to win. And antitrust cases, whatever the money damages are in antitrust cases, they're tripled. So this could be a $4 billion loss for the NCAA. It's going to take a period of years for it to be decided, and maybe appeals and all that. But this is a threat to the NCAA, and it's just because of their mismanagement of how they've handled this over this last few decades.
Well, you call it mismanagement. I'll call it arrogance. I just think they've been so arrogant. I think they've been arrogant in the fact that, and what's happening right now, Jay, which, I've got a lot of friends and I'm not coaching right now, but the onus falls on the booster right now. So you've got a booster that buys his football and basketball tickets. He pays his licensing fee. He's already in for 20 or 30 grand, whatever that might be, and he gets his tickets. He goes to the game and he supports his team. But now the collectives, or at each university, they're asking that booster, hey, we need an extra $50,000 from you. And not only do we need it this year, we need it next year, and then the year after, and the year after. We just need you to keep giving. And so, again, where the NCAA sits on the sideline, the people who love their team, the boosters, they're the ones feeling the heat of how long can I keep giving. And, yeah, at some schools you've got a billionaire guy that can throw a few million in there every year and doesn't mind. But it's a lot of people as well that really can't afford or want to do that every year. I can give you a gift. I'm not sure I can give it to you every year. I can't give you 100 or 200,000 every year. Yeah, there's a small percentage that can. But I think that's where it's falling on. And I think that, again, the NCAA, outside of the lawsuit you just mentioned, I think they've just kind of skated by again without having to really fork over a whole lot of money or any to the student athletes. And I think that's been bad.
It's been really bad. And I think the way I see it happening is there are still people who are willing to give a lot of money to these schools, but they don't want to give half to the school and half to the collective. They want to give it all to the school and tell the school, look, you make your decisions with the money.
Right.
What I think we'll see in the future is the schools will just pay the players directly. They'll sign them to a contract in addition to their scholarship papers and all that stuff. And that'll really normalize the business relationship between the player and the school. The transfer issue will be diminished because the players will be under contract. It'll be a heck of a lot easier. But what you'll see is these schools now will be a lot more efficient. And I don't know if you agree with this, Mark, but when you first got into coaching, your staff, even when you were at Alabama, your staff was small compared to what the staffs are now. I mean, now a head basketball coach has a chief of staff.
Right.
Like, what the hell you need a chief of staff for? Like, what does that mean?
Director of development,
director of operations,
director of everything.
Director of development. You got a video coordinator. You got all these guys. You take a team picture. There are twice as many suits as there are uniforms in the picture.
Right.
So they'll get more efficient there. There won't be, the staffs in these athletic departments won't be as big as the Pentagon anymore. Right. They'll start saying, wait a minute, we need to put our money where it matters most, and that's on the floor and the key personnel that we have, and the rest of it we don't need. That's where we'll see. Right. They're not going to cancel sports. They're not going to do all these doomsday things they've threatened, because none of it's true.
Right.
And it wasn't true that people were going to stop watching. Our ratings are higher in the NIL era than they ever were before. People don't care.
No,
they want to watch their teams play. They don't care. But we'll see the schools get way more efficient. And I'm not. It might be a bad thing for the chief of staff that's no longer on staff.
Right.
But for everything else, it'll be a positive.
Well, it's also transparency, because what I'm hearing now a lot is, and I've talked to a lot of coaches all the time, and you're recruiting a guy, and somebody, it's an uncle or coach or an AAU coach or somebody says, hey, Duke's putting together a package at $500,000 for my son. And the reality is, we don't really know if that's true or not. Nobody knows. And if I had a good player and I was a high school coach, I'd try to get my guy the most money possible, and I'm going to fib a little bit and say, well, this school's going to do this. And it's not very transparent. And I think if the schools end up having to pay, which I think they should pay, and I think the kids will benefit, I think everything's cleaner, better. You've now put guardrails up, and it's not the wild, wild west as it is right now. Because I think right now there's just too much chaos, and it's too hard to follow.
Yeah, and that's a great point. I mean, if you sign players to contracts, you'll have an established market. They can manage all this through roster size. It's really not that difficult. But they want it to seem difficult because they don't want to do it. And, there's part of me that doesn't blame them. I mean, if I didn't have to pay the people that, perform services for me, like if, the people that, do the landscaping around our house, that'd be great. But that's not the real world. And these players, like now that we have NIL, we're seeing players stay in school longer. And, Zach Edey came back for another year. A lot of these players that would have left otherwise are coming back.
Right.
And that's not only good for the schools because they get another year of service out of a really good player, and it's going to, really help their team. But if we really believe in education, and I think we all do, then how could we argue that that's not a really good thing to have these players stay in school longer and gain more education, which is supposed to be the whole point of this. There's really no downside to any of this, except we've got to wrap our heads around This is, this has never happened before. And now the players have gained a little bit more power, but they still have to go to school. They still have to turn their papers in on time. They still have to be good teammates and keep their noses clean, all that stuff. I don't think any of that has changed. They've just become savvier. And they're like you and I, when we graduated college and went out into the real world, like I didn't have any idea what to do with my money.
Right.
Now they're becoming financially literate when they're teenagers.
Yep.
And if they make a mistake, so be it. But, I talked to Tom Izzo, and I talk about this quite a bit. You know, Tom, he's as pure of heart as anybody I've ever met, but he's very old school. And he really does believe that this is not good for young people. Sort of in the idea of it's in the realm of too much too soon. And I don't argue with him. I mean, he may be right. But one of the things I've told him and some others is that if players couldn't drive until now, kind of like with NIL, and all of a sudden the NCAA said, all right, players can drive. I know there'd be coaches out there that would say, oh, geez, what's going to happen now? I mean, they're going to have to keep their cars up. They're going to have to keep their registration current. They're going to have to maintain these cars. Some of them are going to get in accidents. They may get a DUI. Like that, all of that's possible. But you know what? The overwhelming majority of them, they drive and they do just fine. It's really not that big of a deal. And I look at, they'll figure it out. I look at this exactly the same way.
Do you think, Jay, that at any point in time, do you think there's the NCAA is in jeopardy of maybe at some point just not being around any longer? Do you think that could happen where people will get so frustrated? Conference commissioners, your prominent, strong athletic directors would say, okay, we may have had enough, and it's time. We hear about that a lot, but do you think that's realistic or not?
I do. And there are a couple of historical analogs to it. One, when you and I were young, very young, kind of in the 70s, the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, was the most powerful sports organization on the planet. They picked the Olympic team. They had an extraordinary amount of authority. And now it just runs summer basketball tournaments. Due to the Amateur Sports Act, that Congress passed, it diminished its authority. And so it's totally different now. And then at one point, the NIT was a bigger deal than the NCAA tournament. And now it's a secondary event that doesn't have any real power. Things can shift in a heartbeat, kind of like conference. When you and I were in school, the Southwest Conference is a big deal. Doesn't exist anymore. So I think the NCAA could go away in a heartbeat. I can tell you, and for smaller school fans, they're not going to like hearing this, but if I were in charge, if I were king and could make whatever decision I wanted, I would have all the big shots, kind of like it is in football, the top 120 or so institutions that can really compete on the highest level, financially and otherwise. I'd create that division. Every good player would want to compete on that level. So you would have more talent spread out over fewer units, and you would have teams with greater depth. It would be so much better and so much easier, and it would be a sane business to run. And it's also where we're headed anyway, because all these big conferences, they're not going to share their money with all these institutions going forward. They're just not. And I don't know what's going to be the trigger that starts it, but there's no way the SEC is going to keep funding all these small schools. And we're already hearing, about the NCAA tournament. Some want to expand it. Some want to say, hey, we should start our own thing. There's discussion out there about it. I don't know that it's going to lead to anything in the near future, but the one thing I'm sure of is this is not going to look the same in 10 years as it looks now. I don't know how, who could have thought, 5 years ago that USC and UCLA would be in the Big Ten.
Wow.
But, all bets are off now.
Right.
These are NBA and NFL franchises.
Well, financially,
you can't tell me that.
Yeah, financially too, Jay. The difference in schools, and I've coached at different levels. The haves and the have-nots, and you're in the SEC and the ACC. Financially, there are some schools that are in the conferences that are we call them mid-majors, low majors, all those type things. Financially, they can't compete. They don't want to compete. The presidents don't want to put that much money into their athletic programs, which is fine. but they're still Division I in basketball. And the reality is the schools at the top of the food chain, they just got so much more money that there is a gap, that's already there. And so I think your suggestion is right on. I think it's gonna probably get to that. Let me ask you this one, Jay, kind of as we wrap up. You've been phenomenal. So I know as a parent, you and your wife, and I ask everybody this. It's always an interesting question and answer for me. Is looking back, like we talked about, parenting is hard. But if you could, with your child or anybody out there, if you said, man, if I could just gift and I could breathe into my child these couple, 2 or 3, or how many ever it is, characteristic, if I could just gift them to somebody, and you said, and I asked you that question, what would your answer be?
Well, I think with my kids, what I would like them to have, and I think they do have it, but when you're young, it's probably hard to process everything. At least it was for me. Is just the idea that, take a breath and step back and think about, everything's going to be okay. Mm-hmm. I don't have to, this one opportunity, you want to take advantage of your opportunities, but at the same time, nothing is make or break. Mm-hmm. And, I think so many of these young people, they have more to process now than we did. Mm-hmm. It's harder to be a young person now than it was when we were young. They just have more going on. There's social media and all this, all these pressure points that I certainly didn't feel. Mm-hmm. And so I always kind of think about, and it's a lot with what goes on in my life, and I wish I had done it when I was younger, to take a step back from any given situation and say, am I going to care about this in a year? I'm probably not. So I probably don't need to really worry about this. Make the best decision right now. But you know what? It's really not that big of a deal, because everything in the moment seems like it's such a big deal, and it's really not. Like some of the things I know when you were coaching, certain things happen, and you're thinking, my God, we got to have this. And 5 years later, you look back on it and go, did I worry about that? Really? I don't even remember that. So I just sort of the patience of just handle your stuff and don't worry about it. Mm-hmm. Like it's really not that big of a deal. It'll take care of itself as long as you're doing the right things day to day. I just want my kids to have that peace of mind because they're prepared. They're well educated, they're smart, and they've handled their business really well. And I always, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I always remember this, that when I was young, and even through college, there was a lot of my life that was kind of have to. I had to go to school. I had to do this. I had to take this class. I had to be here. And when you get out and you start working, I have to work. I have to make a living. But I always felt like if I take care of the have to as appropriate when it's going on, later on in life, I'm going to have want to in my life. That my decisions are going to be more about want to. And, we're both like right up knocking on the door. I'm going to be 60 in December. And I feel lucky that, a lot of my life now is want to. Mm-hmm. And that's what I kind of, would hope for my kids is like, take care of the have to stuff, but don't worry about it. Like you can be concerned about what you're doing, but don't worry about it because worrying doesn't get you anything. Mm-hmm. You're going to be fine. But take care of that, and then hopefully if things go well, then later on in life, you're going to have some want to opportunities.
Wow. Well said, Jay. Very, very well said. I have enjoyed it. As always, man, you're the best, and appreciate you coming on. And I'm having a ball with this podcast, by the way. I've had great guests. You're obviously one of them. But I'll be watching. I'll be watching you on the tube, man, and let's stay in touch. All right?
Well, I've always valued our friendship, brother. I've known you for a long time, and still remember doing your game when you were Murray State. That's at right. Vincent Rainey. You and I had a horrible continental breakfast before the game. Talk about the haves and the have-nots. We were both have-nots.
Way back then. All right, Jay. Have a great day, brother. Love you.
Be good, brother.
See you.
Love you too.
Bye-bye.